Okay, so welcome everyone. Hope your hackathon's going well so far. I'm excited to kind of see what all the projects you guys are working on and the progress you guys are making. Um, when I was in college, I loved doing things like this. I think this is a great way to test out your problem solving skills, and that's probably why you guys are here because today I'm going to talk to you guys about at a very intro level. So just a heads up, there's no previous experience needed for this. It's very introductory. But the goal of today is to kind of talk to you about how do you unlock your problem solving potential and become a natural problem solver, because I think this is a skill that sometimes gets lost in translation when you're doing all these courses in college. This is one of those core fundamental skills that will really help accelerate you in your career and your life just in general. So for agenda today, what we're going to focus in on is I'll first introduce myself, tell you guys a little bit about myself. Next, I'll talk about becoming a natural problem solver and why it's important and how to do it. Talk about some problem solving frameworks. We'll focus in on one today, but there's many out there. So this one I talk about today, it's not the end all be all, but it's important when you're going through a problem to have some type of framework to help guide you, right? The next one, I'll give some tips and tricks. And lastly, I'll do a Q&A. So this will be a chance for you to ask me any questions about the workshop content itself, but it will also be an opportunity for you to you can learn more about me too. So whatever you guys would like to talk about, we should have about 30 minutes for Q&A. Okay. Let's see if I can advance. Here we go. Okay. So as you guys may know, I'm Shawn Thompson. I graduated from Penn State University back in 2016. I was in the College of IST. I now work at Microsoft as a program manager. I focus in on edge devices and bringing AI to the edge. So if you guys aren't familiar with edge devices, basically think about like a camera, like an intelligent camera, intelligent like server or gateway, an intelligent like audio device like an Alexa or whatever, that equivalent. And how do you do AI on top of those devices for a lot of business scenarios like retail and manufacturing scenarios and stuff. So if you guys have questions on that, feel free to ask me. I don't want to get too deep into that because there's a lot of content in that area, but it's a really important area. I'll just say that right now. So if you guys haven't explored edge devices or intelligent edge, I highly recommend going to look into it because it's going to be in the next wave of computing to help supplement some of the gaps the cloud has brought upon. So I also am the founder of Solve Tomorrow, and at Solve Tomorrow, some of you guys might already know about Solve Tomorrow. I see some people and the participants who are familiar to me. Solve Tomorrow, I founded that to kind of help college students transition from college to industry and make a smoother path and really figure out what skills are needed to make that transition and help guide them in that. So that's one of the things we focus in on Solve Tomorrow. So I'm also the founder of that. Let me talk a little bit about how I transitioned from college to Microsoft real quick, just so you guys can get an understanding of why problem solving is so important to me. So when I was in college, I thought I was going to be a designer. Like it was what I really thought I wanted to do is be a UX designer. And I thought that because I just like really enjoyed design. I enjoyed visual design, but I really enjoyed the psychology of how people interacted with technology. And I wanted to figure out how could I structure my career around that space. Sorry, I was getting a buzz on my wrist. So I started in college taking all these like HCI courses, and I did some HCI research. And this is for you that are at Penn State. I don't know if you guys are all Penn State students. They didn't have any type of UX path back then when I was in college. They now do, but they didn't then. So I was trying to like kind of make my own. But what I realized in my coursework was like, though I was learning a lot of theory and a lot of like implementation practices, I didn't really get a feel if I liked UX design or not. So what I ended up doing is going out and just solving some UX problems on my own. And what I realized when doing that was, though I like thinking about UX design, I actually don't like doing the implementation of UX design. I don't like doing the user studies, the user research, all of that. That was less exciting to me. What was exciting to me was that end application of someone actually going through it and the strategy of how you go enable that. But I would have never found that out unless I went out and did some actual problem solving myself, right? Because I wasn't getting that experience. So if I didn't go out and go find these problems, and these problems were not like problems somebody gave to me, it was just general problems I faced in my day-to-day life, right? For example, I redesigned like a Facebook app, because I thought the Facebook app was just like not intuitive in some manners on how because back in the day, like in 2016, they used to like really embed a lot of features inside of like menus, like way deep into menus. For example, you couldn't even get to like Facebook groups like back in 2016 without going through like 8 clicks basically, which was kind of crazy. And it just, I'm sure they had a strategy behind it, but for me, it wasn't fitting my needs. So I went and solved it. And I kind of do that with a lot of problems in life, whether it's like, say for example, my electric, like kettle is not working, right? Like instead of going to buy a new one immediately, I'll think about why this is happening, and I'll think about how do I solve this, right? Or at work, if someone comes to me with a problem that's not even related to my task, my day-to-day task, I don't just like push it off and say like, oh yeah, this is not interesting. Just being a natural problem solver, I just think about how can I solve this. Now, whether I go dedicate time to it is a different story, because we only have so much time in the day. But the point is, you need to start thinking about things in that manner. Like that's how you become a natural problem solver. So that's a little bit about me. I think there's a Q&A chat. Do we want to answer that now, Isabella, or do we want to go wait till the end?
We can answer it now. It says, how will Solve Tomorrow help students with the transitional period from college to the workforce with the effect of COVID in society?
Yeah, definitely. I'll touch on that at the end. Let's get through the presentation, but I'll talk about that at the end.
Sure.
Good question, though. Okay, so now getting into becoming a natural problem solver and why it's so important, and then how to do it. So first off, I just want to state this: natural problem solving does not come natural. Let's think about like some of the greatest problem solvers that we know of today. And I'll use people in tech just because we're at a hackathon. So think about Bill Gates, think about Steve Jobs, think about Elon Musk. Though these individuals are extremely intelligent people, they weren't not born with this natural ability to be a problem solver, right? Like that just isn't one of those traits that are in our genes that say we're going to become a natural problem solver. It's not like height, it's not like size. That's not how it works, right? They became natural problem solvers by going out and solving problems that were interesting to them and taking these experiences and taking these chances, right? A lot of these people, like when they were faced with a problem, they didn't say, okay, well, someone else will go solve that problem. It's not important for me to spend time on it. They spent time on it, they learned from it, and they grew. What you'll see, what happens when you solve problems over and over again is a problem you solved maybe like 3 years ago may come back to you when you're solving a current problem. And that's the coolest part about it, is this stuff all builds on itself over time. So how can you improve your problem solving today? It's experience. Like there's literally no easier path. It's not an easy path. It takes time. That's one thing I just want to convey, is it's not something that you're going to be an expert in overnight. It literally just takes time of solving problems. And you guys, I know you guys are all problem solvers here because you guys are in a hackathon, right? That's like literally what a hackathon is. You go solve ambiguous problems. So some of the ways I've gotten experience, I'll speak to my experience here, but there's many ways to go do this. Is just first start by solving your own problems. That's how you can just like get started. Like I said, if there's an app that's bugging you, or maybe it's like something's bugging you in your apartment, just think about how to solve it, right? Take an approach and then really consciously think about how you're solving that problem. That's another key, right? You need to have an approach. There's always an approach to it. So whether you're faced with a tech problem, whether you're faced with a healthcare problem, whether you're faced with like a personal problem, if you have an approach to solving that problem, it makes it less daunting. Take part in events that promote problem solving. So hackathons, Solve Tomorrow, I'll talk about that later. But take part in these events. Like just keep doing hackathons. I think Hack PSU, if I'm not mistaken, is a part of the the Major League Hackathon network. Like just keep taking part in things like that. Keep solving those problems. Solve problems in your classes. And then critically think when things don't add up. That this is like an interesting one for me, because like this is like when someone tells you something, right, and it seems like a problem. Don't If it doesn't add up to you, kind of critically think about why it doesn't add up, and just take that approach and think if you can solve through it and really think about that problem. I know it's really easy for us to just go type into Google, Bing, or whatever to get an answer to this really quickly. But what that actually takes away from you is your critical thinking ability. So before going straight to Google and just getting that answer, I'm not saying being resourceful is not a good thing, but maybe take 5 minutes or take 3 minutes to actually think about why it doesn't add up before you just immediately go find somebody else's like opinion on this, or fact. I guess it could be a fact too. So now let me talk about a problem solving framework that I really believe in. And if you guys know me at all, you know I live by this. So this is based off the design thinking framework. I learned this really early on in college when I was going through my like UX path, but this design thinking path is all about human-centered design. So it's about solving problems for humans. And if you think about problems, just take the human aspect out of it and just say more so solving problems for people and things, right? Like if you just put that thing or that person at the center of it, it's going to help make sure you're solving the right problem. So I apply this structure, this framework, or this mindset to pretty much every problem I solve. And I don't think about it anymore because I've just used it so much. But it will take some time to kind of, embed this in. So at the highest level, the first thing you need to do is understand the problem space. And this is where we need to start with empathy. Empathy is the key to problem solving. If you're solving a problem for, let's say, college students, right? If I don't go talk to college students, I don't go learn about college students, I'm not in touch with college students, there's no way I can empathize with them. Though I was a college student, 4 years ago, it's changed. People have changed, dynamics have changed. Though I might assume I have a grasp on that, I don't. And when we make those assumptions, it puts us at risk of not solving the right problem. So we start with empathy. It's really important to empathize first. Once we've empathized and understood who that person or that thing we're solving for, the next is to actually define and scope out the problem. This is really important because it's really easy to start solving a bunch of different problems. But if you have a well-defined problem set that you're going to go solve, it makes you stay hyper-focused and making sure you're solving that problem that was that you empathize with that end user thing on. Sorry, pop up. Okay. Once you've kind of understood the problem space, now you got to start thinking about viable solutions. And this is where your creativity can just flourish, right? Like when you think about after you've defined that scope and you kind of understand a bit more about who your user is by empathizing with them, it's really important just to start generating ideas at this point in time. This is where you need to just throw a ton of ideas at a wall. Not all of them will be great ideas, but don't let any idea kind of fall through the cracks, right? You want to just throw a bunch at the wall and see what sticks, right? After you have like a list of 7, 10, 15 ideas, then source through them and say, does this match the scope of the problem I defined in the previous stage? And if it does, you select this problem. This idea, right? And this is where you might have heard of like agile development or rapid solutions or whatever, right? Like this is where you need to be quick and get customer feedback or user feedback immediately, right? So after you've generated that idea, you picked which idea that you think is going to go solve this problem for you. You need to go immediately get an MVP out there, which is the most valuable product, right? Like or minimum viable product. If you do that, or you can do a prototype, right? Depending on whatever you're doing. But the point is you just need to get something quick out there that can help you validate that idea. You don't want to go spend a ton of time building out an extreme solution to something you may be unsure of that's going to actually solve that end problem for you. And this is where it's like important once you've kind of validated that to go back to that user you empathized with and now start saying, okay, did this work? Did this not work? And then going back and making some iterations. So it's an iterative process, but really going through that process and really thinking about your end user or your end thing, or I'm going to keep using thing, but your end thing to kind of like be the the centerpiece of solving this problem, it's going to always bring you back to a definition at the end of it. So lastly, this is where it's just kind of some key things that you should think about when problem solving. And one is just you have to execute. You'll hear a lot of people talk to you about, like, they'll come up and I don't know, like when I was in college, this is what people used to always say to me is like, I have this great idea for an app. I have this great idea for this business. But you talk to them like 3 weeks later and they've already moved well on past that, and they didn't do anything to it, right? They just had an idea. They said this could be a cool idea to go solve, or a cool problem to go solve, but they never actually executed on this. This is where execution is like, it sets apart like the doers from the non-doers, right? So you have to execute. And lastly, you don't need to do this by yourself, right? Like, problem solving can be a collaborative effort. It should be a collaborative effort, because those experiences you bring into a team helps you create diverse solutions. And at the end of the day, that's what we need to do, because not every single one of us are like each other. So having more diversity in your solutions makes the solution a much stronger solution. So here's just a few things. Like, this is kind of taking this design thinking and just kind of breaking it down, because I kind of changed up the wording a little bit in the last one, but this is really what it boils down to. It boils down to empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. And this is an iterative process. One quick question, Isabel, can I send these slides out to the participants afterwards so they can reference these?
Sure. If you want to send them to me, I can put them in our general Discord. That might be a little easier.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll share these. We don't need to go into each one of these, but this is a great reference point, right? Like, when you're going through this problem solving, you need some type of structure. If you're not a natural problem solver from experiences, you need to start with a structure. And this is the structure I use. And it's fared well for me in the past. So this gets into Solve Tomorrow real quick. So this is literally just that program I was talking to you guys about a little bit earlier. So Solve Tomorrow is really focused on helping you guys transition from college to industry. And we do this by giving you the opportunity to solve real problems, right? Just like you are doing in this hackathon, like you do at an internship, we get those problems that we've sourced from industry, and we propose those to a set of members in our league. Basically, our league kind of works like, think about like Major League Gaming or the NBA. We have a similar league like that. It's like an actual structure. We have 15 teams. You can go learn more about the website and sign up and register there. But really what it's about is, like, at the end of this, you will be a better problem solver, because we will help you get through we'll help you get through different problems and how to solve those problems, right? So we'll help you with the frameworks. And by the way, this is free. This doesn't cost any money. It's just something that we're doing to help students make that transition and help you guys become natural problem solvers. So with that said, I'll kind of just stop rambling on for a bit, and we'll do Q&A. So let's see what type of questions we're getting here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen too, so I can kind of connect closer to you guys without the screen share.
We can also start with Kareem's question that was answered before on the Q&A.
Oh, okay. Let me look here. How will Solve Tomorrow? Oh yeah, so we just answered that one. Okay, so let me ask you guys a question. Do you guys have any questions about problem solving? Okay, how much user testing do you think is the best one before the MVP? So actually, I don't. So like, you need to, like, when you say user testing, I look at this as more of like a user scoping, right? Like, I look at user testing as you have an MVP and now you want to go test that MVP with the end users. But when you think about user research or user scoping, right, like, that is more around like really understanding who your user is, and that there's no set timeline on that, or like time span on how much time you should spend doing that. It's till you really can understand who that user is, and it's somewhat subjective. So I know it's hard to answer those questions, but it's somewhat subjective. There's no timeline. But what's important is, once you have an MVP, the user testing, you just need to get it in front of your users quickly so they can give you feedback. And the users will most likely tell you what's missing. Like a lot of the times they will, sometimes they won't. And that's where, innovators come into play. But it's really important to get that MVP out quick and see if it's addressing your users' needs before you go and invest a ton of time building out a full-fledged solution. And you'll learn that that's something we work on a lot in industry. I have doubt regarding the acute finding of problems. Sorry, this is moving faster. Okay, so I have doubt that regarding the acute finding problems, the many times leaves some important aspects and problems that need to be looked upon. Hey, Nahar, could you elaborate on that a bit? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking here.
We also have 2 questions in the Q&A.
Okay. Oh, okay. Can you please go over defining viable solution slide once again? Absolutely. So let me go ahead and share on my screen. Okay, so defining viable solutions, this is what it's really about is after you've defined your problem scope. So, okay, let's just walk through a problem, right? So say I'm trying to solve a problem to bring more people together in my college, like at my college, right? So I want to say the problem is I'm having a hard time connecting with people at my college virtually at this point in time because of COVID. We can't go meet in person, right? So we understand the problem scope. Let's say we've already talked to our users and we understand college students at this point in time. Now, at this point of the problem framework, what we're going to be doing now is generating ideas. We need to think about, with that definition that we just said, right? How do we go solve this? So this would be like, okay, well, let's go create an app that allows people to connect with each other, right? That's just one solution. Let's hold a weekly live stream where people can get on and talk to each other and things like. So it's just where you throw a bunch of ideas out, right? And then after you've thrown these ideas at the wall, the next thing is to look at those ideas, that list of ideas you have, and say, okay, match it to the problem definition. Does it meet the problem definition? And does it meet my user's needs? You've empathized with the user, you've understood your user, so you should know what your user's needs are at this point in time. So does it match those? And if it does, and you feel like at this point in time, it's a viable option to go prototype, that's what you're doing next. This is how we go then validate those solutions. We go prototype, then we create MVPs, and then we take that MVP and we go execute on it by saying, let's build out the MVP, and then let's go take it back to that user set that we said, which is college students who want to connect with their peers during times of COVID virtually, right? So I take my MVP back and now I'm testing out and I see where the gaps are, because you'll never get it right the first time. It's an iterative process. But I hope that kind of helps bring some more clarity to, around defining viable solutions. Okay. Okay, so Nahar said, suppose there's a problem which has around 5 parameters, but since we want to define it acutely, consider around 4 parameters list. That creates a problem and the process needs to be repeated. Any workaround? Okay, hey Nahar, why don't you come off mute and let's talk about this.
Is it okay if I unmute you, Nahar? I just have to do it. Okay, one second. Okay, you're on.
Hey Nahar, nice to meet you.
Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. Nice to meet you.
Okay, yeah, hi. So there are sometimes some major problems, or I guess some real world problems, so in which there's a problem statement. So we have to define it acutely in the sense that we have to collect parameters either by searching or by conducting some surveys as such. So if we consider, suppose there are 5 parameters,
Mm-hmm.
And if we think that some of the parameters are not so significant in defining a solution, so we might neglect that. And if we neglect that, so what happens that generally in the solution or in the answer that comes to us is very non-intuitive. So that creates a problem, and the problem needs to be repeated, and the whole process of defining the problem needs to be repeated. So is there any workaround for it?
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying now. Actually, this is an interesting point. How about Nahar, would you mind putting that into an actual scenario though for me though, right? Like let's put this into a scenario so we can like, because I think it's hard for people to maybe think about this in this terms, right? Put it into a scenario, like give me a real world problem and put some parameters around it, and I'll we'll walk through it. I think that will be the best since
Yeah.
this is a workshop.
Okay, so I'll take a very common example that everyone might relate to is the machine learning
Mm-hmm.
house pricing problem. So everyone might know that there are many parameters to consider: the length, the area, the location of it, number of bedrooms, number of kitchen, or so there are many problems. So
Yep.
one might neglect some of the parameters, thinking that it's not that significant in the price. So yeah,
No,
this is it.
yep, that's an interesting one, and I think so. Let's dive into that, right? So I think first off, let me just state this: when you think about those, right? Like let's put this in terms of a product. Let's like think about this as building a product, right? So those are what I would call, features in a way, right? Like each one of those aspects are a feature in a way. And when you're doing product definition, absolutely, you have scenarios for each one of the features you go build out. But before you do that, you have that epic, right? That large set of things, that large scenario you're going to go deliver on, right? That scenario that we're talking about is exactly like building a machine learning algorithm for the housing market, right? Like you have all these small little parameters within it, but those are small feature sets. So I think so we don't have any confusion in here. Think about this as how to go define that initial problem space, right? That large ambiguous problem, right? All the nuances and the details that will come with refining, right? Like if you look at, I'm going to use Facebook's app again, right? If you were to look at Facebook's app initially, when they were initially built out that application, right? It has been refined so much since then to today, right? Because as they learn more from their user, as their user base grew, as they empathized with more users, as that user base was growing, they had to put in these different considerations. And so, yes, when you have a large problem set, you need to think about it largely. And then when you go do when you go into that ideation phase might not just be like, let's go solve one single problem. It's how do you solve this larger problem, which could have multiple feature sets in it, right? So it could have all 5 of those parameters when you dive into it deeper. We're talking at like I think you're talking at like a street level. I'm talking up at like the top of a tower level, right? Because you need to scope out these ambiguous problems first before you start defining all these different feature set. And also machine learning, by the way, when you're doing that, right, that in itself, there's a lot of things you have to do in order to make those algorithms correct. So I wouldn't look at it in that problem. I would look at it in more so like a set of solving human or like thing problems, right? Like for like let's say a cat, a dog, a person, right? So I hope that helps bring some clarity to that. Does that help, Nahar? Yep. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go back to how can we get, okay, is there any other comments or questions?
We have a few in the Q&A bubble. I know some of them are popping up in both chat and Q&A.
Okay, would you mind reading them off? I'm not seeing my Q&A at this point.
From Kareem, we have, is there a time where there may be more than one group of users for user testing?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and absolutely. And if that's the case, you need to understand all of them, right? Now, when I'm thinking about like starting off, since this is like a 100 level workshop, like let's think about solving for one user set initially, but sometimes there's definitely multiple users where you can't be as hyper focused. It might be a wider set. It might be a wider range of demographics. And so, yes, but the process stays the same though. At the end of the day, you still need to empathize and define for each one of those user sets and make sure, because maybe your set of users don't have the same needs. And one thing to note though is like, you should always start slow and then scale, right? Like go, if you guys are familiar with Reid Hoffman or his Master Scale podcast series, I'm sure you guys probably are all aware of that. And if you're not, I highly recommend it. Go listen to how some of these like revolutionary founders basically scaled their business and where they started from. They started on a hyper-focused market. And when they started on this hyper-focused market, they then scaled afterwards. Like look at Brian Chesky from Airbnb. Like he didn't start with solving for every single user at Airbnb, even though he had the vision that this could probably go reach, you know, millions of people. He didn't start solving for 1 million people. He started solving for a small set of users, right? And he had a problem definition and he empathized with them, right? So it starts small, you got to scale, it's a process. But great question, Kareem.
I have another one from Kareem. How should we determine the cost associated with a product that needs to be brought to market?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of times when you're solving a problem, it might just be yourself solving the problem. You might have a group of people solving a problem. If you're in industry, it's a little bit easier because you have budgets. But if it's a problem that you're solving, you need to equate to how much time it's going to take you to solve that problem and what do you value your time at, right? So if you're going to go build an app and you say the app's going to take me 6 months, you need to think about how does this, like what is the cost associated with me doing this? How much time am I going to spend? What am I going to give up in the meantime of doing this? Is it worth the investment, right? For me personally, at the college stage, I absolutely think it's worth the investment to go spend time building something to a user set because you're getting experience, you're solving problems, you can put it on your resume and talk to it, right? Like when I interviewed at Microsoft, to be honest, I didn't really talk about any of my college like work. I just talked about the first startup I started in college, which was around helping nonprofits get website redesigns by crowdsourcing. And when I was in my interview, I literally just talked about that scenario because I was super passionate about it. I knew it well. I knew the problem space very well. And I was able to articulate how I started at that root problem and created this solution that helped to map to solving this problem. And how did I get resources involved? It took me a lot of effort and time, and that startup wasn't something that turned into a multi-million-dollar startup, right? But I was able to use that experience as experience to help me grow my career. So you never know how it's going to work out, right? But you have to do those assessments early on. And I think when you're in college, it's okay to go take those type of risks, and it's okay to go dedicate time to this because you're in like in a learning, exploring phase. You might not know what you want to do.
I have another question from Anonymous. How do you think we should apply this in problem-solving coding questions related to academics?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say this is a coding framework. I wouldn't even put it in that term of coding framework. So there's plenty of ways to tackle coding problems. This is really a human-centered design problem, right? Like I applied outside of human-centered design to like things as well too. But at the end of the day, you have a user. Like think about someone who's going to build like a dog food dish, right? Like their end users are actually dogs, right? So that's what I mean by a thing. But I don't apply it to like logic things like coding and things of that nature. So, but when it comes, depending on what your major is, Sam, Anonymous, I don't know what your major is, but if you have any type of business like scenarios or like real world scenarios where there's an end user at the end of it, this is a great place to go apply it whenever you have like a use case around that. You go into I know when if you interview at big tech companies, right? Especially for a product manager role, they will ask you these scenario questions, right? And when you go in these scenario questions, what I've seen with a lot of students is they just get lost on how to go solve it when someone gives them a super ambiguous problem. Like let me just give you an example. Like say they asked you design a car without tires, right? Like that would probably throw somebody off in the moment of an interview where there's already like nerves and anxiety, right? But that's where if you have something to lean on like a framework. Like I said, this is just a framework I use. There's many other frameworks out there. If you have a framework to help you walk through that, it gives you something to rely on, right? Like it gives you something to kind of like think through and work through. So I hope that helps.
I have a question from Sam. At what point would you know it's time to back off? For example, red flags to look for?
Yeah, one of the key indicators for me, especially for personal projects, is when I'm just not interested in doing it anymore, right? Like if I wake up and it feels like a task for me to go do it, I won't do it, right? Because at the end of the day, I'm investing my time in it. So that's one of the major red flags for me. Now, when you work in industry, it's a little bit different because they're paying you for your time. So you don't get to make those kind of decisions. But for example, let me give you a career example. So say, for example, I'm working on a team where maybe I'm doing front-end web development is my main job, right? I'm doing front-end web development. And I just realized I hate doing front-end web development every single day, right? And it's a task for me to go into work. The problems I'm solving at work are just not interesting, right? You have, as a person, you have the opportunity to go find a new job, right? But for me, it's like intuition. It's like knowing myself and knowing what keeps me going and keeps me motivated. Because at the end of the day, no one's, especially a personal problem. I mean, a problem you're solving for yourself or a side project. No one's probably paying you to do that, right? So, what's your motivation to do it? It's like your self fulfillment, right? For work, it's a paycheck. So if you want to say, okay, well, I'm okay with hating my job for 8 hours a day and getting paid. That's a decision you make, right? But you also have the option to go find a new job and go solve different problems. So it's a feeling, Sam, just to kind of like sum it up. It's feeling. For me, it's a feeling. Awesome. Any other questions? Well, first off, if there's no other questions, this was an honor to be able to come speak to you guys today. This is super, super cool to be able to speak to you guys in this hackathon. I would love to, if you guys want to put in the chat, let me know what problems you guys are working on. I'd love to know what you guys are building out this weekend. Yeah, best of luck. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, am I still sharing out my screen?
Yes, you are.
Okay. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, just scan that QR code. You can go connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to, chat with me about anything offline, let me know. Just send me a message on LinkedIn. Glad to connect.
Hey, Shawn.
Yeah, Kareem's unmuted. Go ahead.
So you wanted to hear what we're doing for challenges?
Yep, definitely.
So like my team and I, we're working on the AI challenge. We're working on the what else? We're working on the Capital One challenge and the COVID challenge. So we're basically like creating a crisis management tool so that basically we're doing machine learning. Like I'm heading the machine learning aspect of it. Like building models based on the data sets. So we're analyzing data sets, the data within data sets, making models, providing metrics. So like confusion matrices, false positive, false negative readings, and then also the accuracy scores. And essentially, like after speaking to one industry expert, they were saying, it's nice that you have like the models, but like create a product based off of those models. And so now we're creating like a UI, UX design with Figma to like essentially creating a low fidelity mockup, but also a higher fidelity mockup so that the proof of concept is there. And essentially, like I had a question about, how can the costs be accounted for when you're talking about like COVID relief in specific regions, more specifically like Pennsylvania, since we wanted to like narrow our scope so it isn't broad. So we actually had to manually alter the data that we took by basically, so it was like, United States data from all of the cases and instances from like March through November 5th. And so we changed it to Pennsylvania, but now we're trying to make it so it's county specific, so that when we have the UI design, it's actually a map of Pennsylvania with the hotspots as like the key indicators of where the most COVID relief should be going to. Yeah, and then they're going to be like clickables and drop down menus, and then we're having like the models as like the visual aids for the analytics. So we have like a dashboard too and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And okay, so that gives some good context around that question. Thank you. And also thanks for letting me know what problem you guys are solving. That's super cool. The COVID one's really interesting. I've seen a lot of those heat maps. But this, I'll take this back to design thinking framework, right? Creating a machine learning model makes sense for this, right? And when you create a machine learning model, right, there's a lot of effort that goes into that, training the data set, creating the algorithm itself. There's a lot of effort that goes into doing that. But at the end of the day, right, like who is that model for, right? Who's going to use that model? So whoever that industry expert was that said, what's the product here, right? It makes sense, right? Because that model is only so good, right? Like you can have all this data living in some type of custo database or whatever the database you guys are using, right? But if it doesn't get to the end user that actually cares, like, like maybe a general citizen of Pennsylvania who has probably no idea what machine learning is at the end of the day, right? Like you need to simplify that for them and meet their needs, right? Like, so a dashboard might be the best way to do it. A dashboard might not be the best way to do it. Maybe it's a different UI, right? But you have to really understand who your user is. And then once you understand who that user is, like you can put all the technology stacks you want to put on top of something, right, to do it. But if it doesn't meet the user's needs and the user doesn't get value out of it, at the end of the day, like you're probably going to waste your time because no one will actually look at it. And I hate using waste of time because as a student, you're learning, right? Like you're learning about machine learning and you're trying out these different algorithms. But when it comes to pure product, right? Like, do you want people to adopt your product? You need to make sure you hit and empathize with that end product, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
End user. So, think about, so you're going to solve for Pennsylvania citizens, like, talk to some Pennsylvania citizens and say, hey, we understand that this problem is like, maybe you don't want to travel to this area because it's a hot spot, right? Maybe it's the holidays are coming up, right? And you don't want to travel to hot spots, right? What would you need to know to feel safer in your travel?